Hello. Today I want to talk a little bit about how governments waste our money and how the situation we're in at the moment, which is where we're finances are pretty dire, I think, has been much contributed to by misspending and incompetence of previous governments, particularly Conservative governments. I think the present government hasn't yet had time to waste too much money, but I've no doubt they will in due course. Now, back in the 70s, when privatisation was first talked about, when Thatcher became Prime Minister, it seemed like quite a good idea. There was an argument that private enterprise would run things better than the state. And indeed, I mean, there were a number of state-run things that were really very badly run and that clearly would be better under private enterprise, particularly, for example, British Airways. I mean, in that sort of industry, government ownership is not really appropriate, and one or two other things as well. But suddenly there was an absolute mania for privatising everything, and over a period of 20 years, so much was privatised. For example, I can tell you there was BP, there's British Aerospace, Cable and Wireless, Amazon International, British Telecom, British Gas, British Airways, British Airports, British Shipbuilders, Rolls-Royce, British Steel, all the water companies, all the electricity companies, and rail track and nuclear energy and British Energy, all privatised. And they brought in 60 billion, which of course was just spent. It just went. It meant we could have some tax cuts and everybody could feel a little bit more prosperous and so on. But the worst privatisation of all was North Sea oil. In the late 70s, the per capita GDP of Norway and the UK were very similar. And then oil and gas was discovered, and Norway very wisely decided that they were going to keep at least 70% of it. And so they did. We, on the other hand, sold the whole lot off. That is, rights to extract the oil and gas. As a result, right now, that we have to pay world prices because, despite what Tory MPs wanted us to think previously, that we had to continue exploration so we'd have our own gas on our own doorstep, it's all sold on the world market. We have no control of the prices. On the other hand, Norway, of course, have absolute control, 70% control. And over the years, Norway has become very, very rich because of owning the 70% of all the oil and gas that's been extracted from the North Sea. And this has meant that not only is Norway a very rich country, a very prosperous country with fantastic health service and education and all the rest of it, but also they have the biggest sovereign wealth fund in the world, bigger than anywhere in the Middle East, bigger than China. They have a sovereign wealth fund of 1.3 trillion. It's quite a small population. And that works out that each Norwegian is worth £325,000, or their share of the sovereign wealth fund is £325,000. We, on the other hand, have a national debt of 2.7 trillion. It's coming up to 3 trillion. And this means a debt or liability for every single man, woman and child in this country of just under £40,000. And likewise, the rail, the gas, the electricity, so much, and the water companies have all been sold off to people all over the world who have no great interest in how well these things are run. I've used the analogy before. It's like somebody owns a house and they get a bit short of money and they fancy having a holiday, so they sell the roof and they rent it back. Rent it back from somebody who doesn't have much interest in looking after their roof and so on. And then when that money's spent, then they will sell the plumbing and then they decide to buy a new car and they sell a bit more and a bit more. And in the end, they end up owning very little of the house, but just paying out huge amounts of rents to other people. No capacity to earn, just a capacity to pay rent on assets which were previously owned. And of course, the classic is the water, isn't it? I mean, in 1989, Thames Water, for example, was sold for 8.5 billion, of which 6 billion was debt. So they didn't only have to find 2.5 billion to buy it. And since then, they've paid out 10.4 billion in dividends, and they now have debts of 16 billion. The total debts of all water companies in this country are something like 75 billion. We're the only country in the world where water, which we all depend upon, an absolute monopoly, is privatised. Not only that, much of it is in the hands of foreigners. I mean, you can't really, you can make it up. But I want to mention some of the other extreme wastes of money that we've experienced in recent years. And I want you just to imagine this. Imagine or think about the cost of our defence. Ministry of Defence costs 54 billion a year. We are the sixth biggest military in the world. And this 54 billion pays for 240,000 personnel. That's 180,000 soldiers, sailors, airmen and airwomen, and 60,000 civil servants that back them up. And when you think about how much all that costs, you think of uniforms and you think of equipment, you think about computers and offices and housing, and for the people who actually live away, live in barracks, something like food and clothing and everything, bedding and all the rest of it's got to be paid for. And then you look at each of the services. You look at the Navy, they've got 2 aircraft carriers. Can you imagine what it costs to run an aircraft carrier? It's a staggering amount of money. It must cost hundreds of thousands of pounds to start the engine. And they've got 4 nuclear submarines, 5 attack submarines, and 60 other boats at least. Look at the RAF. They've got 102 of those Euro Typhoon fighter jets, 38 F-35s, the American attack aircraft. They've got 500 other planes. And they're all going to be maintained. You imagine the cost of maintaining all of them? Fantastic. Huge range of servicing facilities and so on that have to be available for all this stuff. And think about the army. Think about the thousands, literally thousands of lorries and Land Rovers and ambulances and all the other things they have to have. Think of all the guns they've got, the cannons and the rifles and the grenades and the grenade launchers, all this stuff. It was this huge organisation. 54 billion. Now this little woman here, she's called Dido Harding. She spent half of the defence budget, 27 billion pounds, on test and trace. And it didn't work. This is the Public Accounts Committee. They said there's no clear evidence that the £27 billion scheme run by Baroness Dido Harding contributed at all to a reduction in coronavirus infections. They set up a few laboratories and so on. They bought millions and millions and millions of those little cardboard packets with the lateral flow tests in them and so on. And they had people, the main part of it, I think, was to have people sitting at home. All these people had nothing else to do, who were sitting at home waiting for someone to phone them and say that, or to an alert from an app saying that somebody had been in contact with somebody who had coronavirus. And then the idea was to ring up all their contacts and so on. This apparently failed. In fact, the whole thing failed. There's a whole stream of reasons why it failed. But this failed because very often they couldn't get hold of the people, or by the time they got hold of them, it was too late and so on. And very often people just ignored the instructions to stay at home because if they felt all right, they'd just go on to work because they couldn't afford to stay at home. Now, these people who were doing the telephoning and tracing, they were getting paid £10 an hour, which is £80 a day, say. A lot of them, there were films on television at the time saying how a lot of them were doing absolutely nothing. They'd wait for 2 days for a phone call, and they found it difficult to contact people anyway. It was a waste of time, really. But once you had all these thousands of people getting £80 a day, Dido Harding employed 2,500 consultants, management consultants. These were from accountancy firms. Management consultants, 2,500 at £1,100 a day minimum. That's minimum £3 million a day. This went on for weeks, went on for months. The highest paid consultants were getting £6,624 a day, £30,000 a week. Nearly £40,000 a week. And you have to say, how is this allowed to happen? How is it possible to throw away so much money? And she is Dido Harding. She's been in front of the COVID inquiry this week, and she's very self-assured and so on. And I mean, she's not got any great reputation. I don't think she was a bit of a disaster when she was CEO of Talk. She basically was a friend of David Cameron, and he stuck her in the House of Lords. And then she's, her husband's was a Conservative MP, so then she's up for all these big jobs. She obviously hadn't got a clue. She didn't have any idea what she was doing. And we hear the government all the time now going on about how they inherited this 22 billion hole in the finances left by the Tories. 22 billion, so that's only 2/3 of what she spent. Billions and billions spent for something that didn't work. And when you compare it with what other countries spent, I haven't found any country that spent, looking at a lot of research, I've found a single country spent even a quarter of what we spent per capita. And we had higher deaths than most countries. And yet, it's okay. It's okay to move on. And at the same time, there's all the PPE. I know I mention it from time to time, but I mean, these people got away with it. They've got away with it. They're all on their yachts, and they've got their Bentleys, and they've got their houses in Miami. They're having a fantastic time. These people are going to live for the rest of their lives in luxury, on the basis of having known a politician who could put their name forward as a supplier of PPE. Just listen to some of these. We all know about Michelle Mone. She might end up in court, but it won't be for the PPE. It'll be for other reasons. But it's a company called Uniserve, and what they are, a logistics company, and they were arranging transport for all this PPE, and I think they thought this must be a good idea. So they got a contract, and as a transport company, they got a contract, or several contracts, totaling £777 million. And I think they also got the contract, which they may still have, to store all this stuff in fields somewhere in Essex before it was burnt, because so much of the PPP was unusable. Nobody ever got really done. Nobody's been pursued or sued or being threatened with prison for having sold defective equipment. No, it's been burnt. And we're paying before we burn it. Look at Ayanda Capital, a private investment firm specialising in currency trading and offshore property with no history in PPE supply. They got £252 million in contracts. And I can tell you, having dealt with China for 40 years, I can tell you, I mean, these people all make at least 50% profit. At least half of what they supply will be a profit. Outfit here called KAU Media Group, a marketing firm with no prior experience in PPE procurement, £40 million. The company diverted £10.1 million in brokerage fees to a shell company owned by its directors, raising questions about profiteering. PestFix, a company which dealt with pest control supplies. They had net assets of £18,000. Contract for £350 million. Mela Designs, a fashion accessories company. Contracts totaling £170 million. Finally, Chandaboy Agencies Limited. There are dozens of these. These are just some of them. Chandaboy Agencies Limited, a company specialising in nut and coffee products. £108 million. And at the same time, there were all these companies that were able to supply stuff, had suppliers in China. A lot of them had stock here in the UK, all ignored, because various ministers had put their names forward. And of course, we had this guy, Lord Bethel, who was organising all these contracts, doing it all on his WhatsApp, on his phone, the famous phone which he couldn't hand over because he'd either lost it at one stage, and then he said he'd broken the glass, then he said he'd given it to his children, various reasons that he couldn't hand it over, so it was never handed over. And likewise, Boris Johnson was able to hand over all of his messages on all of his phones, except for that one period dealing with PPE. And this is our money, and they're chasing, they're chasing people and looking at secret algorithms now, looking at people's bank accounts to see if they've been selling something on eBay because they're so desperate. People who can't afford to feed their children, they're the people that are going after. All these old folk who want to keep warm in the winter. Why can't they put an extra blanket on? Another thing that caught my eye in terms of waste of public money, immense waste of public money, is HS2. Now, when this was first planned in 2009, first agreed they were going to go ahead in 2009, the budget was 37 billion. And that was to go from London to Manchester. Now, immediately the cost started going up. Now, obviously, you would expect over the last, 12 years that prices would have gone up. But they went up so much that in the end, Sunak decided to scrub the top half from Birmingham to Manchester. And so it became a much shorter rail, 100 miles instead of 170, and it was just London to Manchester. It doesn't actually get to Euston. It only goes to somewhere called Royal Oak, which is somewhere from Euston. They haven't quite figured out yet how they're going to get it to Euston. But that is now, despite the fact that it's not much more than half the distance, is now costing almost double. It's 67 billion it's expected to cost. And you think, how can it be so expensive? And how is it that prices can increase so much? I mean, way, way, way beyond inflation. And I looked at the cost per mile of building high-speed rail in various countries. I found it quite interesting. In California, it costs £45 million to build a mile of high-speed rail. In Japan, it's between 7 and 31 million. In China, it's between 13 and 17 million. China, incidentally, in the last 40 years, have built something like 25,000 miles of high-speed rail. Germany, it costs 20 million pounds a mile. In Spain, it's 15 million pounds a mile. In France, it's very, very expensive. It's between 46 and 59 million pounds to build a mile of high-speed rail. In the UK, it costs between 396 and 514 million pounds to build a mile of high-speed rail, getting on for £500 million per mile. And you have to say, why? Why is it so expensive? And we know planning is an absolute nightmare. We know that this HS2 is going to cross a number of Conservative constituencies, and Conservative MPs complained a lot, so a lot of it had to be put in tunnels, far more tunnels than were necessary, really, but that was in order to preserve the countryside and so on. And even so, if the whole thing was tunnel from London to Birmingham, and it was gold-plated inside, you wouldn't expect it to cost what it's costing, £67,000 million for 100 miles of railway, which is parallel to an existing line. And this is, we're a poor country. Could that money not be better spent? Now, another recent case is the case of a guy called Graham King, who owns a firm called Clear Springs Ready Homes, and he managed to get a contract to house asylum seekers. Now, quite apart from whether you think asylum seekers should be housed or not, or whether they should have nice conditions or even decent conditions, that's not the argument. The argument is how much this Mr. King is being paid in order to accommodate asylum seekers. He's got a contract which lasts until 2029. Now, in the year 2020, I think was probably when he began with these asylum seeker contracts, he made a profit. His company made a profit after expenses of £760,000, £750,000. By 2022, he made £35 million. And last year, 2024, he made £91 million. He is now he's one of our newer billionaires. He's in the Sunday Times rich list. He's worth £1,051 million. And you have to say, how is it possible to make so much money so quickly out of the government? Because the government is paying him. How is it possible? Are they not overpaying that someone can make £91 million in a year housing asylum seekers? And not only that, he's providing very, very basic accommodation. I mean, it's been all over the papers. I can read you some of the things. As I say, this has nothing to do with whether or not you believe that asylum seekers should be housed or should be housed in decent accommodation. And it's probably it should be processed a lot quicker. But anyway, numerous reports from asylum seekers, charities and local authorities have detailed issues such as people sharing rooms, sometimes without adequate privacy, no hot water, broken heating, lack of cooking facilities, poor hygiene, mould, damp, leaks, rodent infestations, bedbugs, cockroaches, broken fire alarms, electrical sockets. And so it goes on. Some have reported a culture of fear which prevents them from complaining, inadequate access to essential information and so on. This guy he's previously running caravan parks and he's just seen an opportunity, he's grabbed it, and the government is stupid enough to pay all this money. But it's our money, and somebody else is being squeezed at the other end. Someone has to pay for it. And we all know taxes are going to go up. We know there will be more cuts. Well, if you're throwing money away like this, as I say, you can't blame the Labour government for PPE or for test and trace or any of that stuff. It's all before them. But governments just generally, I think, are extremely bad at spending money, and I think they should spend a lot of money on setting up departments with professional people who understand business, who understand contracts and how to negotiate contracts, because any fool could see some of these contracts, particularly the PPE ones and particularly these Clear Springs things. I mean, they should be really just clamped down. And there's so much else, isn't there? There's so much waste in overpaying. I think it's if you work for public service and you get towards the top, I mean, you're paid so much money, and it's take for example Paula Venables, the woman who was running the post office during the Horizon scandal. I mean, she knew about it apparently, and all these postmistresses being sent to prison and losing everything and so on. She's walked off scot-free, smiling away, and she had £3 million worth of bonuses before she left. I mean, that's not right. And you look at NHS managers, what they're getting paid. They're 1,700 managers in the NHS being paid more than 100,000 a year. Can we afford that? A lady called Anne James, who's the chief executive of University Hospital Plymouth, she was paid, like for the NHS, a manager, chief executive, £400,000 in a year. And you look at, for example, Transport for London, I mean, monopoly. The drivers haven't done recently, but one time it seemed like every 10 minutes they were on strike. They're getting very, very well paid. But in TfL, Transport for London, there are 1,319 people who last year were paid more than £100,000 in salary and bonuses. It doesn't seem quite right when so many people are really, really struggling. And it does seem to me as much a priority for the government to be cutting down on waste. We look at how many civil servants they employ now. I think it went up something like 300,000 during COVID and never went down again. There must be an awful lot of waste there, especially now with AI. You'd think there'd be fewer and fewer all the time. But at the same time, the government is targeting poor people. And that really is not right. It's not right. But anyway, as I say, it'll probably go on. I don't suppose it's going to change anytime soon, because it's easy, and the use of consultants is another thing, because civil servants, if they have to let a contract out somewhere, the first thing you do is go to a consultant, get the consultant to say it's okay or not. The consultant just charges a whole load of money just to glance at it and say, yeah, that seems fine. And then the civil servant is covered then, because if anything goes wrong, there's, the consultant said it was all right. That's one of the reasons why they use so many consultants, just to confirm that the money that they're throwing away is okay. But I think you'd have thought a Labour government would have really given priority to try and cut down on some of these savings, this waste, these expenses. But anyway, I've no doubt it'll continue. But I think it is a matter of great concern, and I think this poor government spending is a major contributor to our present situation, frankly. Anyway, if you watch this far, thank you very much indeed, as always. If you haven't already subscribed, I'd appreciate it if you do so. And so until next time, thanks again, and bye for now.